Happy Thursday. Um, my name is Suzanne Jewell, and I am the host of Mindful Mornings Miami. And today is my very first Jewel's Gems in the Garden. I'm inviting you to join me in my garden for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee with me. And I've had several people reach out after listening to Mindful Mornings Miami and the really interesting interviews that I do to actually be offering some of my own wisdom, some of my own journey. And that is what I'm going to do here today in these conversations that we're going to have. I'm going to be broadcasting them daily. And we're going to talk about really this whole topic of what it means to have a life that is mindful, how to pay attention to what we're experiencing in this human experience. And today I'm bringing to the forefront something about the anxiety that I often experience. Today happened to be a day that was planned to be one thing that unraveled and is kind of not had an easy regrounding or getting back on track. I apologize if you're hearing a plane go overhead. You are in my garden after all. It is Jewel's Gems in the garden. It's not important what the details are of what I was experiencing, but I want to talk about the experience and how I am seeking to pay attention and build some present time awareness around this experience. So just as I always do everything, the intention I want to bring now is around one of the most important steps that we can take, which is to slow our roll and take a pause. Because it's literally in that pause, as Viktor Frankl teaches, between stimulus and response, hopefully it's a response, not a reaction, and there is a difference, that we get the opportunity to experience that freedom. So in that pause, I'm going to bring to the forefront one of my favorite little poems about the imperfection of the mindfulness practice and the divine insanity of the human experience. Jack Kornfield wrote this. If you can sit quietly after difficult news, if in financial downturns you remain perfectly calm, if you can see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can happily eat whatever is put on your plate, if you can fall asleep after a day of running around without a drink or a pill, if you can always find contentment just where you are probably a dog. So I bring today to this conversation something that I spoke about last evening at my beloved community, Unity on the Bay, where I occasionally do the Wednesday Om Hour. And the topic was around #ChangeHappens. And I discussed the fact that even our founder, co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore's husband, Charles Fillmore, stated that had he not really been inspired to want to call the movement or the organization Unity, he would have considered actually calling it change. Because it truthfully is the one constant that we can always depend upon. And yet, as humans, we work so hard to try to create stability and security and a groundedness. And yet, if you follow the Buddhist precepts and quite a few other wisdom traditions, you will find that as you go inward, as you turn toward the refuge that is within, there are some at even the levels of Zen who go to the topic of saying that there is nothingness. That once you reach enough of the layers of the peeling away of whether it's the ego or any of the constructs, there's a heart and a soul that is within. And yet, there's a spaciousness. And that spaciousness has some kind of a presence. You can feel it in the life force that beats your heart, breathes your breath. or that lives in the leaves of the trees and the seasons and the crocuses that come up in the spring in Michigan and the royal poinciana leaves that fall in the winter in Miami. That is the presence. And today I found myself getting so wound up in someone else's energetic knots and their drama and attachment and blame that I was almost hooked and activated and triggered and pulled along with the energetic journey they wanted me to walk in, which was their issues around pointing fingers and right, wrong, good, bad. I realized I was not being particularly skillful. And that is what, in the Buddhist realm, as well as in Rumi's poem, out beyond right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. And it's this conversation around not about right and wrong. Did you take a skillful action? Was it an unskillful choice? And in the consequence, or that which unfolded after you took an action, are you able to do what I call dare greatly, fail mindfully, and pivot quickly? Which is when we fail mindfully or we choose unskillfully. In this moment, we have the chance to choose again, to choose differently. Always. So I chose today, rather than letting myself continue to get twisted in the knots, to offer up conversation around kindness and offer gratitude, thank the individuals with whom I had engaged. Whether they understood that or not wasn't important. It's because that's what I chose to bring forth. And so I'm recognizing some of my patterns, and I'm recognizing my capacity for getting caught in overwhelm. Some of that has to do with potentially overcommitting, being more mindful about my resources of time and attention, and where I'm capable of being present. So I am just honored that for those of you who may have taken the time to tune in, what we'll be doing every day is we'll have a short little practice. We'll have a theme for the day. And today's was overwhelm. And as we move forward, I'm also going to be sharing, because I'm working on my first book. I'm going to be reading from some of those little vignettes, because the book has written itself word by word of my being human. And it's probably appropriate to quote that poem from Rumi. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a meanness, a joy, a sorrow. Welcome them all at the door laughing. Let them in to sweep your room of all of its furniture and clear it out for the next new delight. For they are all sent as gifts from beyond. This being human is a guest house. And the guests that have arrived at the doorstep of my life have been anxiety and overwhelm and death and depression and joy and surrender and happiness and mindfulness. My parents imparted wisdom in the book. One from my mother's deathbed, the S word for strength. She dictated to me from her deathbed 14 days before she passed, and I wrote it in my phone. So I am just going to ask us for a few seconds to remember. Slow your roll. Take a pause. Take a mindful moment to breathe. We're here. When when you choose to slow your roll, take the pause, and take a breath. It's when you actually connect in your body with yourself, this life, the life that is all around you. Thank you for joining me for my very first session of Jewell's Gems from the Garden.